Death haunted Larry Hall from his very first breath. He came out of the womb struggling to breathe, and as he grew into a man, the rumors and whispers of death that surrounded him grew louder and louder. Dead women, dead girls, confessions and recantations, dozens of unexplained disappearances. Females who crossed paths with Larry had a funny way of never making it home. So, was Larry Dewayne Hall one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history? Or is he a serial confessor so desperate for attention that he'd say anything, even the unspeakable? Let's go back to the beginning. Larry Dewayne Hall came into this world as part of a set. He and his identical twin brother Gary were born on December 11, 1962 in Wabash, Indiana. As a twin, you could say Larry got the short end of the stick. In the womb, he and his brother were afflicted with twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. In layman's term, one twin gets more nutrients than the other one. In this case, Gary got the good stuff, and Larry was born with an antisocial tendency and an IQ of just 80. Despite their physical differences, Gary and Larry were best friends. They grew up on the edge of a cemetery, and by the time they were 12, they were digging graves with their father. After high school, Larry took a job as a janitor, but when he wasn't working, he and Gary hit the road, going town to town across the Midwest for Civil War and Revolutionary War reenactments. Gary was big into military history, and Larry threw himself into it too. He even grew big, bushy mutton chops to better fit the role. And near many of the towns they stopped in, a girl would go missing. Coincidence? Maybe, but maybe not. A little over 19 miles from the place he was born and raised is a small Christian college called Indiana Wesleyan University. 19-year-old Trisha Reitler was a student there. In the spring of 1993, she walked to a nearby store and bought a soda and a magazine. She was never seen or heard from again. Just after midnight that night, her parents got an ominous phone call. The police officer on the other end posed a chilling question. Do you know where your daughter is? They thought they did, but they were wrong. Trisha was gone. Her blood-stained clothes and shoes were discovered in a field about halfway between the store and her dorm. A week later, just as the sun was setting, two other students made the same half-mile walk to the store. As they were headed home, a van passed. Then it passed again. The third time the van crept past, its driver leaned out. With Trisha's disappearance fresh in their mind, the girls ran. Once they got to safety, their first call was to the police. As it turned out, the man behind the wheel of the van, the man with the can't-miss-them mutton chops, was none other than Larry Hall. He explained that he had simply been searching for a friend's house, but when officers asked for the address, he gave them one that didn't exist, and he was free to go. 6 months after that, 3 hours away in Georgetown, Illinois, 15-year-old Jessica Roach goes missing while riding her new bike. Weeks later, her badly decomposed body was discovered in a cornfield in Perrysville, Indiana, just over the state line. It seemed Larry had an alarming pattern, but it would take more than a year for it to emerge. In November 1994, Georgetown police responded to a distress call from two teenage girls. A weird guy driving a van wouldn't leave them alone, and when they ran his license plate, they discovered something shocking. 11 girls in 5 different towns had reported the same thing. In late spring 1994, one of those complaints had put him on a police radar in Gas City, Indiana, just 8 minutes from the place where Trisha Reitler disappeared. Larry was suspicious enough for them to search his van. Inside, they found knives, a can of starter fluid, and some cotton balls and a mask, rope, and newspaper articles about Trisha Reitler. And that's how they connected Larry to the missing girl. The next day, he confessed to her murder, and he even offered to show them where she was buried. But just when they thought they were about to close the case, Larry's confession fell apart. Suddenly, he couldn't take them to her body, so they kicked him loose. And 5 months later, he was back home in Wabash answering questions again. This time, it was about Jessica Roach. He played it cool at first, but when they held up her picture, he flinched and started to cry. I tied her up, he admitted. I can't remember with what. I put a belt around her neck. But he went even further. All of the girls looked alike, he said. I can't remember all of them. During the interview, Larry also admitted to raping and killing Trisha, but the following day, he made the wild claim that he had only been describing his bad dreams. He recanted everything. It had all been the result of an overactive imagination. Overactive imagination or not, investigators found some curious notes while searching Larry's home and van. Seen joggers and bikers, many alone, one note read. Seen some prospects. In a to-do list of sorts, Larry wrote, cover all floors and sides of van. No body contact. Buy condoms. But Larry's story was about to get even stranger. He claimed he planted incriminating evidence in his van for attention. According to Larry, he knew it was only a matter of time before he was questioned about stalking young women. Rather than defend himself, he allegedly stuffed his van with items guaranteed to land him in an interrogation room. Now, what kind of person would do that? The kind with a personality disorder that makes him eager to please and open to suggestion. In other words, a wannabe. A jury of his peers decided that was an absurd explanation. In June 1995, they found him guilty of kidnapping Jessica Roach. He was sentenced to life in prison 3 times. After his first trial, he was granted a second one in 1997, and again, he got life. But it's what happened before his third go-around in front of a judge in 1998 that's a really wild story. And it all comes back to Trisha Reitler. Her loved ones were still searching for a sign or a clue or a body they could lay to rest. Was Larry's 1994 confession about what he did to her true? Federal prosecutor Lawrence Beaumont thought so, and he wanted to give her parents the answers and closure they deserved. So he devised a plan. The kind of plan that if you saw it in a movie, you'd say, that would never happen in real life. But if you happen to catch Blackbird on Apple TV, you know it did really happen. And here's the true story behind that gripping drama. Jimmy Keene grew up about 135 miles away from Larry Hall in Kankakee, Illinois. In their youth, they never met and couldn't have been more different. Jimmy was an all-star athlete nicknamed the Assassin for his ruthless pursuit of victory on the football field. He was voted most popular, and his father was a cop. And Jimmy had it good, but he wanted it better. So he started selling drugs and eventually built an empire. In the books, he wrote about this case called In with the Devil and Blackbird. Jimmy estimates he was bringing in $1 million a year by the time he was 20, and he enjoyed every cent of it. He indulged in Corvettes, a 6,000 square foot house, and a hidden closet with a trap door to conceal his fortune, a place he called his Fort Knox room. But behind the frills and thrills, something was eating away at him. He was tired of looking over his shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop. As he tells it, he lay awake one night, wishing for a way out. 2 weeks later, his exit plan suddenly appeared when a squad of DEA agents blew his front door off its hinges. The gig was up. In 1996, Jimmy was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was 10 months into his 10-year prison sentence when Beaumont approached him with a plan. Personable, charming Jimmy would transfer to Springfield, Missouri maximum security prison full of murderers, mobsters, and gang members. There, he would befriend a man who was notoriously hard to befriend, Larry Hall. The reason? Investigators believed Larry was full of secrets like the location of Trisha Reitler's body, but they were running out of time. His conviction was up for appeal, and without any forensic evidence tying him to Jessica's murder or kidnapping, there was a good chance he might walk. They were banking on the off chance that he might be willing to share his secrets with a friend. If Jimmy could extract a confession that included the location of Trisha's body, he would be rewarded with freedom, a chance to start over, a clean slate. He would have his redemption story. Now, at first, Jimmy refused. Springfield was a place for the criminally insane, much more dangerous than where he was now. But when he learned his father had suffered a stroke and didn't have much time left, Larry Hall became his only way out. Suddenly, it was settled. Jimmy was going undercover in Springfield, Missouri. His instructions were clear. Don't approach Larry too soon. The man was awkward and suspicious. If Jimmy came on too strong, he'd be spooked. And if that happened, Larry might never open up. It was best to wait 6 months or so. But Jimmy didn't have 6 months. He needed to get out and see his father as soon as possible, so he did exactly what they told him not to do. Mere hours after his transfer, he bumped into Larry intentionally, brushing shoulders with him, and Jimmy apologized and asked for directions to the library. Larry showed him the way, to which he replied, "Thanks, I appreciate that from a cool guy like you." He seized another opportunity to make a positive impression on Larry not long after. While the suspected killer was engrossed in an episode of America's Most Wanted, another inmate abruptly changed the channel. Seeing that Larry was disappointed, Jimmy attacked the man, punching and kicking him. The stunt landed the inmate in the hospital and got Jimmy thrown in the hole, but it earned Larry's respect. The two of them spoke regularly after that, and eventually he trusted him enough to tell him more about Trisha's murder. He told Jimmy he took her home with him, but left her tied up in his van while he thought about what to do with her. Eventually, he recalled driving her out into the country and choking her, but he never offered any details that might lead them to her body. It was too vague. One day, Jimmy found Larry carving wooden falcons and hovering over a hand-drawn map in the prison woodshop. The map was dotted with red pinpoints throughout the states of Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. When Jimmy asked about the birds, Larry made the bizarre statement that they watched over the dead. Now, according to Jimmy's books, there were maybe 15 falcons lined up around that map. So were all those red dots meant to be burial sites? Jimmy was confident the map was the key the investigators needed to blow the case wide open. He left a message for his contacts on the outside and thought about how delicious his freedom would taste. He figured he only had 24 hours left inside. That night at lockdown, he couldn't contain himself. Convinced he had accomplished his goal, he unleashed on Larry. After months of sucking up to a suspected serial killer, he called him a sicko and a creep. The outburst was so extreme that Jimmy was tossed in solitary, and he stayed there for 2 weeks. Unfortunately, investigators didn't get Jimmy's message right away, and his only contact behind prison walls was the chief psychiatrist, who happened to be on vacation. By the time they pulled him out of the Springfield prison, the map and the wooden falcons were nowhere to be found. Larry realized exactly why Jimmy had been pretending to be his friend. He even said the words, "Beaumont sent you, didn't he?" But he didn't actually get what he came for. He didn't get the exact location of Trisha's body. He had blown his cover too soon. Nevertheless, a judge decided that he had put forth a valiant effort, and Larry's conviction for Jessica's kidnapping was reaffirmed in 1998, even though the alleged serial killer was never convicted of murder. He is alive and well today, still serving his life sentence in jail. Meanwhile, Jimmy was released and credited with time served, which gave him 5 more years with his father before he passed. In an interview with CNN, Gary said he thought Larry could have killed all those women. He even agreed to visit Larry and try to draw information out of him. The result was more murder confessions. Later, Larry would retract them, every last one. Today, authorities believe Larry Hall may be responsible for the disappearances and deaths of as many as 40 women and girls. The trouble is, no other evidence exists to say for sure if he's the guy or not. So, were his confessions fact, fantasy, or a little of both? Only Larry and all those missing girls know for sure. And to this day, Trisha's parents have never been able to answer that midnight question. Do you know where your daughter is? They, like so many other parents, do not. And Larry Hall, for once in his life, isn't talking.